The second movement of the Beethoven Violin Concerto is, I think, the heart of the piece. It's my favorite moment of the piece, and I think really transports the listener and the performer to just a different place. The tempo is marked as larghetto, which is one of those tempo markings where it's not easy to see exactly what it is. So basically, it's not as slow as largo, but it is a pretty slow tempo. Musically speaking, it does have to still flow in quarter notes. That doesn't mean necessarily that it has to always be that all parts can't be subdivided into eighths sometimes, but there are many sections that must flow in quarters, so when it's too slow, it is a problem. It should, however, feel significantly slower than the first movement. This might be, always a note I make myself, don't play the first movement too slow, because it's not a slow movement yet. The larghetto is unusual primarily for the fact that the violin does not play the theme, and it's a theme and variations. So the theme is first played by the orchestra, and then it's played again by the orchestra while the violin ornaments, and then one more time by the orchestra while the violin ornaments again, and then by the full orchestra in tutti. Then we actually move on to a new theme, which is incredibly beautiful and very slow. One of the most amazing moments in the piece also. And then after that, the theme starts again, this time in pizzicati in the orchestra, while the violin plays around the theme and plays these syncopations around it. So this time you participate a bit more. And then this second theme comes back. So it is like a theme and variation in which the form of the theme and variation kind of like disintegrates, and it eventually just becomes this dream that seems to go on forever. This is one of Beethoven's specialties, I think, that he can write themes, pieces in theme and variation form that don't feel even in the slightest bit repetitive or predictable, and where often eventually the theme and variation form kind of dissolves into a sort of more free fantasy in terms of the form. So it's certainly unusual to have a slow movement with such a beautiful, touching theme in which the violin never actually gets to play it. It's played by the orchestra, and when you first enter, you play these figurations which are always answers to the orchestra. So this is a movement where for most of this movement, it is the job of the violinist to follow the orchestral lines. That doesn't mean that there isn't leadership. Sometimes you do show things, and of course you can also ask for a slower tempo or faster tempo and all those things. You have a lot of control, but when the performance is happening, you are waiting for the horns, and when they play, this is an answer to the horn call, and so much of what you play is reactive. So when you're then there are these little cadenzas. Then again the orchestra, yam papa. Again, you're always answering the phrase. Even these beautiful these beautiful figurations are ornamentations around the theme that's in the orchestra. that's the idea. It's never the violin show. It's the violinist is meditating on top of what the orchestra is doing, and this relationship and communication between the violin line and the orchestral lines is part of what makes this so touching. The overall shape is that the very first orchestral tutti, when they play the theme, is incredibly soft, and then when the violin first enters, it is a bit more active, and then this next variation is a bit more active still, with finally by this point you've reached much more intensity, so now the theme returns with a much fuller sound in the orchestra, and perhaps also a little bit more moving. And it is after that the form of the theme and variations stops, and the violin plays a series of these figurations, which should sound basically like free improvisations. You shouldn't be able to predict like okay, no, this one and this one, this one. It should really feel like you're not totally sure what you're gonna do. And then the next one. It's an incredibly special, very intimate, personal moment, and very, very delicate. The orchestra is playing incredibly softly. So this is a moment where, as a violinist, you really can go to the lowest point dynamically, and that's not a balance problem, because the orchestra can play incredibly softly. It's written this way. So overall, it is important that the movement is not too slow and not too fast, but basically, when deciding the tempo, you need to look at not just what you play, but you need to really think about particularly this figuration. If this is too fast, then it feels like too easy. Dam, pa, pa. It no longer has like the same kind of significance. And if it's too slow, then it can feel almost funereal, like a funeral procession. It's not what we're going after either. There's a certain speed, with it speaks. There's actually quite a narrow range of tempi where that pickup works, and I find that is the most useful guide for me to find the tempo, is to think about the pickup in the orchestra. And so that's what I arrived at. Because there's always, depending on what moment you look at in a piece to find the tempo. If you look at this moment, well, then maybe you end up with a faster tempo. When you look at what's best for this moment, you end up with a slower tempo. But there can sometimes be moments that only really work in a certain tempo. They just can't go too slow, too fast. And I find the pickup of the pickup at the very start of the second movement of the Beethoven Concerto is one such moment. When it's too fast or too slow, I feel like it doesn't quite work. So this is something I always think about. And you're not always in charge as a violinist. You do have to respond, listen to the orchestra, adjust. Orchestral players and conductors, they always know if you're listening or not, and if you're responding or not to what they're doing. They're more likely to go to you if you're also going to them, and This is very important in this movement. The most beautiful moment, in my opinion, in the movement happens when the first theme comes back. There's a kind of free passage the violin plays by itself. And here the orchestra comes in with the theme. Now just single notes. It's like he's telling the story in the fewest words possible. He's telling the theme in the fewest notes possible, just by distilling it down to these single pizzicatos. That is, I think, my favorite moment in the piece. It's an incredible feeling. Really, even after many times of performing it, it's really, really special. Then the movement continues and the second theme comes back. And again, it's very important not only that conductor and winds listen to the soloist, but also the other way around. The violin becomes effectively part of this wind chorale. Also, you shouldn't vibrate too much when you play the theme again, because there are sustained wind notes underneath. And finally, at the end of the piece, is when the horn call comes back. And then finally it comes back in the strings. And this should be the softest thing they play in the entire concerto. Even if you play it in a big hall, this is the moment when you go to the very softest dynamics. And then the orchestra plays this fortissimo, which is incredibly dramatic, and it's more dramatic because of the triple piano before that they played. Beethoven is somebody who loved extremes and he loved contrast. So you often have in his music different textures at the same time. You might have short notes and legato notes and high notes and low notes. You have the softest dynamics to the loudest dynamics. In the first movement is a moment when you have the crescendo from pianissimo to fortissimo in one bar. Even though he's a classical composer, I think one shouldn't be too hesitant to go to the fortissimo when it is asked for.